Yay, we are live. Hello, everyone. We have close to 200 attendees right now. This is incredible. I have Tiffany Taylor here with me. She's my friend. She's a product designer. She's great. Hello. Yes, so we're going to spend probably the next minute or two. Yes, say hello, hype her up if you're here for her. I hope you have your digital posters with you. This is going to be awesome. Oh, we have people from Brazil here. We got, yeah, everyone here in the chat. So yeah, hello everyone. We're so happy you're able to join us today. If you've been with us, hello from San Diego. Oh, me too. I'm in San Diego too. And Tiffany's close by, and by close I mean like two hours away. I supposedly, but it's like 4 to 6 hours really, like with traffic. So. But yeah, if you've been here before, you know the drill. Say hello, just like everyone else in the chat. If you want to network, share your LinkedIn, all that fun stuff, go ahead and throw that in there. As we go through our chat today, if you have questions that come up as we talk about things, feel free to toss those questions in the questions tab. If there are a lot of questions, upvote the questions that you like, that you're like, no, this one should be answered, and we'll kind of go in that order. We're probably going to be here for about an hour, so we will get through as much as we possibly can. But it is also the evening, so I want everyone to kind of take some time off, relax a little bit before they end their night, or even start your day if that's the time of day you're in. Yeah, cool. All right, we'll give everyone about another minute, and then we will jump right into learning about Tiffany, because it's going to be a fun one. Yeah, everyone's here. They're ready for your journey, Tiff.
I'm a little nervous, but it's okay. We'll get through it.
We will get through this. Oh my goodness. Oh yeah. All right. Hello. All right, so everyone is super pumped, so I think we're going to ride this train now. So we're going to get started. So like I said, I'm Emily. I am the community manager for Design Lab, and if you're a current student, you already know me, and if you're not, welcome. Super, super happy you're here. We do chats like these quite frequently just because we think it's really important that, you know, we hear all the different kind of corners, angles, whatever stories, you know, on how people transition to design or even just got started. And I think what's so unique about Tiffany's journey is that her story is just like many of ours. A lot of us have our career switchers. We come from backgrounds where it's not at all related to design. Like when we worked at the Apple store, right? It's just, you would never think that 2 employees from the Apple store could go on and become like product designers. But hey, dreams do come true, and I think this is the career that has made it possible for us. So we would love to hear her story in a little bit. But yeah, like I said, say hello in the chat, put your LinkedIn if you want to connect with other people, you know, have your conversations there. If you have questions, put them in the questions tab, and then we will get through questions in the last half of this chat. Cool? All right, so I'm actually going to hand it over to Tiffany so she can introduce herself a little bit, and then we will jump right into learning more about her.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so my name is Tiffany Taylor, and I'm a designer based out of LA. All my pronouns are she, her. And I've been doing design now for, oh gosh, maybe almost 10 years, like a decade, I would say, in a professional capacity. It's kind of scary to think about 10 years now. But I've, she just said, I basically started in like retail world. I never would have thought I would become a designer, but I've been really lucky to have a lot of supportive people. And one of the things I'm really passionate about is career switching, and people who are like, oh, I didn't study that in school, or I didn't think I would ever be a designer. I don't know anyone who's a designer. I was like, I didn't either. So like if I can help give advice or help people get on that journey, like I want to. And especially now there's great programs like Design Lab that can help you have a focused education and become a designer. So like, yes, I'm so excited to like chat with everyone today and share anything that can maybe help you all.
Yeah, so maybe we can just dive right in, right? We said that, hey, we came from retail, we worked in office spaces. So, you know, in terms of that, like what was, I guess, your journey like when you were like, you know what, I want to do this. Like, this is something that like is my calling. Like how like what kind of like was your journey and experience in trying to convince people that like, hey, I can do the thing, I can do the job?
Yeah, so for me, I actually switched. So when I first went to college, it was in St. Louis, Missouri. So shout out to the Midwest, I guess, if you're in the chat. And I was studying fine art, and it was really expensive at that undergrad. Like it was too expensive. And also I was like, I need to make money. So I was like, maybe I can do something like commercial art, but my school didn't have commercial art, and it was just to the point where I couldn't afford it anyway. So I actually dropped out, and I was just like, I need to take some time to think about what I want to do. And in that time, I decided to move to California to study animation. And so I worked like odd jobs, retail job. That's how I got the job at the Apple Store. And so I transferred Apple stores to California. And at that point, I was like, I'm going to be an animator. And what now looking back, I love the storytelling aspect of animation. It was not the actually making animation. I actually hated that. And so I ended up staying out of that program. Like I dropped out because it was too expensive. So I was like, man, I've dropped out a lot of places. But at that point, I was in San Francisco and I loved it. Always been really into tech. I think I saw my brothers in this chat. Like we grew up with a really nerdy dad, and like I've always been on the computer, like doing stuff, like in making websites and stuff. When this is before blogging, you know, people are younger, but like this is like GeoCities days. I'm aging myself right now, and so I learned how to code by just learning how to make my blog look pretty. And so because I could code and I was in the Bay Area, I was like, is there some way I can use the skills I have? And because I had dropped out of school and I was working part-time at Apple, I needed another job because Bay Area is expensive, as some of you probably know. So I got a job at a startup called Socialcast, and I was the office assistant. And I was kind of bored in that job because it was part-time and I had a lot of free time. And so I think one of the things that helped me was, instead of just kind of like browsing Facebook all day or doing like side stuff, I was like, okay, is there like, there's people doing cool stuff here. Like, what are they doing? And like, is there anything I can learn? Because I knew how to code a little HTML, CSS. And so what I found was there were things that I think were, maybe you would call inefficiencies. Like it wasn't working very well, or I saw a problem, and it wasn't necessarily like a problem with the project they made. It was more like a problem, like my job would be easier if we had a portal like this, or if we had a form like this. And so I would just be like, hey, I can make this thing, or like I would kind of like pitch it to my manager, and my manager was super supportive person named Carrie, and like she was like, as long as you can do your main job and that, like go for it. And then what actually happened was my boss, she got pregnant and she had to go on maternity leave. So I had the opportunity to become full-time. And so I was still the office assistant. And then I also was helping out with her like client support type work. And so when she came back from maternity leave, they were like, okay, well, we don't need you to do that anymore, but hey, you're like kind of doing well. Like, what do you want to do? And so I had the opportunity to really just say like, okay, well, I think I want to be a designer kind of thing. Looking back, I don't think I said it like that, but I just knew I wanted to be in tech. So I was just like, whatever you need me to do. So at that point, I became a tech support engineer, and I still stayed on that job. I became friends with the designers in the company, and I like to call it like a design apprenticeship, because I was inching my way closer to like a design career, but I was just doing whatever job I needed to do. And I actually stayed at that startup for almost 5 years, which is a long time in tech. But we went through an acquisition. So that means like a big company came and acquired us. So it was VMware, a really big IT company. And so by the time VMware acquired us, I had been doing a lot of little small design projects internally. So like for the sales team, making like a little portal, for the customer support team, making like an internal portal, and making like documentation and training. So that was really what let me make like an internal portfolio. So I was just able to kind of tackle problems as I saw them, and just kind of be that person to put my hand up and be like, hey, I can figure out how to do this. And also I should mention, on the side, I was doing freelance. So I would like make a website for my favorite restaurant, like that I always went to, and they had a terrible website. And I was like, hey, have you ever thought about like updating your website? And like, I'm a believer in things like bartering. So like, hey, give me free curry and I will do your website, things like that. Because at that time, I was still new, and I have a little, I'm sure some of you may have heard of imposter syndrome, something I still work with today, but back then especially, I was like, I'm not a real designer. So like, that's one bit of advice I'll start with. Like, if you want to be a designer, say you're a designer, and just tell yourself that. Like, don't limit yourself. Looking back, I limited myself so many times with that kind of mindset. But anyway, so yeah, I was doing side projects, and I was doing like client work if I could find it. Definitely getting underpaid. So that's another bit of advice, like learn how to negotiate contracts and things. So yeah, I took on just projects and kept learning, and I would take a job sometimes and I'm like, make this site. And I'm like, I don't know how to do that. So I have to like go Google and like, okay, I have to like code and figure out like, okay, that's like some kind of JavaScript thing. I'll figure it out. So it was a lot of that, just trying things out. But the good thing was I learned that like code is cool, but it's not what I really like. What I really like is solving user problems, and the design part of it. I've always been into visuals and storytelling, like I said. So I think that merger is why I love design, because you do tell a story. Like the user is your main character, and like the story is how we're going to help solve their problem. That's kind of how I approach design. So yeah, that's kind of what led me to my first design job at Socialcast. the position opened up and I was actually too scared to apply, but a lot of designers were like, you're basically on our team, you eat lunch with us every day, like just apply. And so I did. So like shout out to Socialcast design team for being so supportive and encouraging me to apply. And I did apply. And I remember my interview, I was so nervous, but I got the job. And then that was my adventure into design. I think I stayed for 2 years after that. And then by then all my design friends had left the company. So I was like, oh, maybe it's time for me to spread wings and fly and start working at other companies. And yeah, that's kind of how it kicked off. That was a long answer.
No, that's so awesome. And I think that there are two things that you touched on that are like hot issue topic, maybe not like issues, but they're definitely hot topics. So I think the imposter syndrome thing is one of them. And then the other one, I feel like this could very well live in the questions tab right now, but is, around coding. So maybe we'll touch on the coding one. So I know that, especially with today, right? Like with UX being more of an existing industry, like people know it's more of a thing than it was like even just 5 years ago. The big question is like, do designers need to learn how to code? Now there's, yeah, it can't hurt. Yeah, it can't like hurt to know the basics, but like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's such a hot debate. And like, I want everyone listening to keep in mind, like this is like a while ago when I started. So to your point, like design was not as well known. So just knowing how to code was a great asset for me. Like it was just something where, especially in small startups, when they're looking for one person and they're like, oh, and you can like put things in production code, great. Like, and for Socialcast, all designers had to code. So my opinion of it is now, if you have like a natural aptitude for it, like you like it, or it's fun for you, you want to learn more, I would say go for it. If you don't, like, I'm not saying you should just ignore it. I think it's worth knowing the basics, or at least being able to speak the language. You'll just work better with developers that way. But I found that for me, I like the CSS side because that's very visual. And so that's why I learned how to code, because I just wanted to make things look the way I wanted them to look. And so for me, it was a struggle. I learned once I worked with some like brilliant engineers, I'm like, wow, they naturally get it. I can figure it out, but it will take me like many hours. Like I'd rather spend my hours doing something that I think I'm better at and more enjoyable for me. So that's kind of how I look at it. It's like, yes, learn how to code, but if you find yourself like getting through like a base class, like something like Design Lab or another like Code Academy or whatever kind of like online learning program for code, like do the base one, but don't try to be a program. That's like my advice. Now, if you have a natural aptitude for it and you like design, like more power to you, but I would never tell someone not to learn how to code, because I feel like that's disingenuous, because me learning how to code is what opened up so many doors for me. If I couldn't code, then I don't know that I could have been like, oh, I have an idea for this thing at the company and I can build it. Here, I made a prototype. I wouldn't have been able to do that. But I will add one more note. There's things like Webflow today where you can do like WYSIWYG editors and like WYSIWYG, like what you see, what you get kind of editors. So like, even if you're not a good coder, like learn how to use something like Webflow or like Squarespace or just something like that. I think people will say like designers don't need to code absolutely at all. For me, that's a little unrealistic. Like you don't need to learn how to code, but it's only going to help you. So if you can like carve out like 10% of your week to like look at some code stuff, I would say do it. But again, don't beat yourself up if you're not like an engineer at the end of your journey. It's okay. I'm not an engineer. I don't call myself that. I'm a designer who codes, not a coder.
So I guess that kind of leads to like the interesting topic of the unicorn, right? Like you just said, it's like startups, they kind of only want to have one person, or really only want to have budget for one person. So I think as of today, maybe even reflecting back on like previous roles and such, like how would you kind of position it if a company were interested and they were like, hey, we want to hire you, but you kind of have to do both? Mm-hmm. What do you think your answer would be today?
So my answer today, I'm in a position now where I've had a few jobs and I can choose to be a little picky. So looking back, I've been in situations where like, I'll say one thing now, but I know if I was 5-10 years ago, I would not have listened to that advice, because like sometimes you have bills to pay, like you got to eat, you got to pay your bills. So for me, I would say one bit of advice I got from a manager at VMware was really helpful. And she told me when things are rough at work, or if there's a job, just focus on what you're taking with you from that job to your next job. And so for me, if I saw a job where they're like, well, we expect you to be able to code and ship production code, first, I'd be like, okay, well, you need to hire some kind of engineer. It's fine maybe if you don't have so there's front end and back end. I'm not a back end engineer. I can only do front end. So if you think I can do back end, like we need to understand before I sign the contract. I don't do that. But I can at least say like, take the job if you think you can code basic, even if you're not good at it, at least as long as you can code a little. Don't lie. Don't take the job if you have no coding experience. It's going to burn you so bad. But I would still encourage someone to take it because it's kind of on the company too, they see something in you and they think you can do it, as long as you haven't misrepresented yourself, you know. So I would encourage you to take it, but also if you're really uncomfortable and you're pushing back and you're like, hey, we need to grow the team, you need to hire an engineer, and they're not doing it, then just focus on what you can do at that job. It's like, you know, I'm not going to stay here for 3 or 4 years because like obviously they're not listening to me and this is not the right fit, but I can at least get a really good story out of this experience. And I think that's how I frame all my jobs if there's been a time where I wasn't happy or something was not going well, like, okay, what can I take away from this? Because speaking with that manager, she really helped me learn how to like reframe my perspective. Sometimes I just get so upset, like, oh, so-and-so is happening, or I hate this part, and she'd be like, okay, but look at what you gained from that moment. Like this is going to be a great story for you someday down the road. I know you don't see it now, but it will be. And like, she was right. Like a lot of the downfalls or the moments where I'm like, why do I have to do this? It became something where it's a good story to show how I overcame something. And also I have a really good eye now. I have a spidey sense. I'm like, oh, this company doesn't have it together. So as you go higher in your career, you can be a little choosier, and your past experiences, the bad ones, will really help you learn what to watch out for. And what's good for me might not be good for someone else. So like some places, you know, like if you're an engineer or very engineering focused kind of designer and you like to prototype, some places will be perfect for you, or other places, you know, if you hate that and they actually have a really strong engineering team, like you can have a beautiful relationship where you can like focus on the design and the user, and then have engineers who are focused on like their code and the craft, and you can come together as needed. So yeah, everyone's a little different. That's the beauty of tech now. I think there's so many startups that it's getting a lot more diverse, I think, in the different team styles and team formats. But again, my advice always when you're starting out, if you need a job, take that job. That's like my advice too, because I've taken jobs where I'm just like, it was a paycheck. And you know, maybe now I wouldn't have taken the job, but I think it helped me get to where I am. So I think it was worth it.
So you actually brought up something that also comes up quite often, especially now that we have an audience like likely full of aspiring designers or people looking to transition. What are some red flags that they should be on the lookout for when they are looking for maybe their first or their second job?
Yeah, that one's so hard too, especially when it's your first job. I would say looking at, if it's your first job and you haven't done design and you don't have like maybe an art background, or you're just somebody who maybe you're really good at the problem solving, but you know, the visuals aren't your strength, I would say you kind of need to look at the team format and the structure. So sometimes you might see a company where there's only like 2 or 3 other people and you're coming in as the first designer. You're going to have to carry a lot of weight and wear a lot of hats. And sometimes that's great. Like I joined a startup here in LA, like a floral startup, where I was the only designer doing product design, and I got to wear so many hats, and I actually really enjoyed it. But that was also like my 3rd or 4th job, so it was okay. If that was my first job, I think I would have been really stressed out because they kind of were throwing stuff at me, and I'm like, I don't know what that is. I don't know what you're talking about. I've never done that. So your first job, you know, I think it just depends on your personality. Like, do you want a team? Do you want to be alone? Like, I'm a little bit of an introvert, so sometimes when it's a big team and they like make you do a lot of team activities, like that is not for me. And I learned that from being in places where they do that. But other people love it. Like some people are introverts, you know, or extroverts, they strive up. They're like, they need to draw that energy. So I would look at things like the culture of the company. Like culture is a really big buzzword, but like you can tell, I think, by I'm a notorious person who likes to go on the internet and find everything. So I look at people's Twitters. I'm like, okay, who works at this company? What do they tweet about? What do they write about? Like, what's the vibe? And like seeing things, because you can just kind of tell. Like, I'm not a very sporty person. So if I looked up the company and everyone's just tweeting about sports, or they're on Instagram posting sports games, I probably wouldn't fit in very well there. So like, I think for me, if you can be a little picky, the culture is really important. And then when you're interviewing and talking with the people, if you feel something weird, trust your gut, because there's been times where I've interviewed and I'm like, that person rubbed me kind of the wrong way, but you know, I'm like, I need this job, I take it, I get the offer, sign it, and then I should have listened to my gut, because then it becomes a problem later where like we don't get along, where it's hard to work with that person, like we just clash. And then the last thing I'll say is just opportunities to grow. Like understand what you're coming in the job for. Like, are you coming into this job because you want you just need a job. Hey, I've been there before, you just need a job. But once you can be a little more choosy, like, do you want a job where you can really work on your visual design skills? Or are you looking for a job where you get to do a lot of hands-on research? Or are you looking for enterprise design, so designing tools for work versus designing tools for consumers, things like that. So I think as you get more and more experience interviewing and you see what makes you really excited versus things where you're like less excited about it, yeah, that would be my advice, is just like learning to listen to your gut and then paying attention to those red flags. And one last thing I'll say is practice interviewing. Like, I would interview a lot. Like, when I was early on in my career, like sometimes I would apply for a place, I'm like, I don't think I'm good enough, I'm just gonna apply. And I would apply and I wouldn't get it. But the next interview, I would do better, you know? So like, don't be afraid to put your name out there and see if they, something about you like. But I could also go into another tangent though, because you do, I think one thing a lot of aspiring designers is like, you know, you're following the school's curriculum or your program, and when you all graduate, you're all like equally matched, right? You all look great. So what makes you stand out? That's something else to think about. Like, how, when you're applying for these jobs, like how can you really sell your story and make you the one they remember? Like, oh yeah, she was the girl who worked at the Apple store, and like she talked about how her experience doing customer and retail stuff helps her as a designer because of this. So like, looking at your past, one thing I'll say is I used to be actually really ashamed that I was like a self-taught, like a untraditional path. Like, I felt like I would compare myself to other people who went to really prestigious schools, or they had like their like masters in like human computer interact, all that stuff. And I'm like, wow, I don't have that. And so I would try to like hide that. And I think what really helped me kind of pivot my career was really just leaning into it. Like, I've done so many different kinds of jobs, and I like being a customer manager, like an account manager, helped me build empathy. Like, I was the person talking to the customer, hearing their complaints and taking that to the product team. And that really helped me. That was a skill I got. Like, when I was tech support, like, really helped me. Retail, anyone who's worked retail or restaurant, you know. So like, you have skills that are useful. And then one last, oh my gosh, I'm rambling, I'm so sorry. But one last thing I'll say is, so like for me, I worked lots of different past jobs and things. Like, if you have a job, let's say you worked in a restaurant, and there's so many startups related to the restaurant industry at this point, like focus in on that. Like, you have so many transferable skills. Did you go to nursing school and now you're becoming like a designer? Maybe you can get a job at a medical tech startup or something like that. So like, lean into the skills you have, even if you think in your head like, oh, I hate medical, like I don't know why I studied that, I don't want to do that anymore. But hey, you have that experience, can you use it somewhere else? So that's one thing I would encourage any aspiring designer is, like, when you're interviewing, like, don't be afraid to like play up your unique side. Yeah, that wasn't your original question. I somehow ended up there, but
no, it's okay, because I think the transferable skills as actually was going to be kind of like our next area of focus, which I think is such a great area, because, you know, like, you and I know each other. We've worked in retail. We've worked in basically every other thing that where these soft skills are 100% relatable and transferable to UX. But I think a lot of the roadblocks is it's not on paper, right? Like, when you're applying for a job, right? Like, people focus so much on, well, what years were you working at this company? You know, like, or like, where were you? What was your actual title? But like, you can sit there like till you're blue in the face and say like, but I know what I'm doing. Like, I know how, you know, I know exactly like how to maneuver these things. So I guess, like, what would your advice be, or maybe just like a good pointer for like how to position your soft skills when you are applying for your first UX job?
yeah, I think it's definitely harder when you, depends on the form, you know, when you're submitting your form, sometimes you can't really show much personality. So one thing that really helped me was that portfolio site. It's not just about your projects, like, especially I've done a lot of mentoring and like reviewing people's portfolio, and I love it when I can see a really great portfolio piece, but I also love it when I can understand who the person is and how they think and like who they are and like some of the things they've overcome. So if you can somehow include that in your portfolio, keeping in mind, you know, when people do your portfolio, they're not going to spend like hours on it, unfortunately. I spent hours working on mine. I'm not going to lie to you. Like, I spent so many hours, and then I look at the analytics and people spend like less than 5 minutes on it. I'm so angry because I'm like, what? But I think if there's a way for you to somehow get your story across. So like, when you apply for a company, everyone's going to Google you. They're going to look you up. They're going to look at your LinkedIn, you know, so how can you kind of really show those soft skills? And like, for me, one thing I was able to do is, like I said, through those side projects. So for example, like the restaurant that I made the website for was a Japanese restaurant. And anyone who knows me knows I've studied Japanese for like almost 15 years now. So that's like my hobby. I studied Japanese, like I love the language. And so I think through my portfolio and through like things that I would incorporate visually, like you can tell, like I have an interest in this language. So is it a side project where you can express like, oh, I used to work in retail and just for fun, I redesigned the employee's internal login portal and like I tested it with my coworkers. Things like that are how you can get early on, how you can really, first of all, stand out from your peers, who I'm sure you all love, but they are your competitors for a job. So how you can stand out and use the skills that you've gained in your like design lab program or whatever program you're in and like really show who you are through your portfolio pieces. So I think a personal project is so helpful. You don't only want personal projects though, because if it's all in your head, for example, or you're not actually working with a real client, that can be bad. So if you do have a personal project, like I said, I like to get real people involved. So like if it's me redesigning something at work, I will go to a coworker and I would be like, hey, do you have 15 minutes? Like be my user and test with me. Even if you're never gonna build it or you don't have permission to, like take your company's name off, like white it out, put up a fake name like Acme Corp or something and just do it that way. That's something I've seen people do, like little side projects. I really like coffee, for example. So like, what would it look like to design like an ordering system for my favorite coffee shop if they're like super manual and analog? Like how could I redesign it for them? And like, hey, maybe even show them if you're friends with the baristas, like, oh, do you have time? Like, can I buy you a coffee and like, will you test this for me? Things like that, I think really help you stand out and show your personality and your skills. So yeah, that would be my tip to someone out there who's wondering how to get those skills on their resume.
I think you gave such great advice because one of Design Lab's capstone projects, it's building a responsive site, and oftentimes our students, they will do what you did, like, oh, I love this bakery, I love this like quick service restaurant that I go to. Their website's not great, but there's always the anxiety of like, do I go tell them that I do this or do I just do it? And I think from your instance, like you just kind of walked in and was like, can I help you do this? Like, I can't build it for you, but I can conceptualize it for you. Do you like, I guess like having done this for like close to 10 years already, like, would you still encourage people to like, maybe just get out of their shell and like, it doesn't hurt to go even just speak with that business owner, just to say like, hey, love you. I'm here all the time. You may not notice me, but I want to use you for my project. Is that cool? Like, how do you feel about that?
Totally. Like, I mean, for me, anyone, like, I love my coffee shops, like the ones I go to, I hype them up all the time on Instagram and like places like that. So for me, it's hard. Like, I wouldn't do it for somewhere where they wouldn't be like, oh, we recognize her social media. She's the one who keeps mentioning us. So that's another thing I'll say, like, before I answer, I believe in the power of online for networking. Like I'm a little shy, I'm introverted, and like I said before, but I networked solely through Twitter and Instagram when I was getting my career off the ground. So like lean into that. So like yeah, so to answer your question, yes, I would say, maybe don't try to redesign Starbucks. Like I don't think that's a good idea. Like a lot of times you'll see like designers who are coming out like, oh, I want to redesign the Apple homepage. But that's kind of like a joke. Like everyone redesigns the Apple homepage. If you look at like Dribbble, like people redesign things like that all the time. So like maybe look for a real problem that you could solve. And like you said, like all you have to do is just say, hey, I'm doing this for a project for school, but maybe it can help you. And like, if you want to take it, you can. And as long as I think you're a customer and they know, like the worst they could say is no. And then you say, okay, thank you. And then you can still do it. Just take their name off, change it to something else. Like they don't have to know. You're not going to like sell it or anything. So yeah, I would lean into it because like, even though I'm a bit of a shy person, one thing I've had to do is get over like fear of public speaking. Like if you're a designer, you're gonna have to talk, you're gonna have to pitch, you're gonna have to sell your ideals and your vision, and people are gonna push back. Like you're gonna be like, I have this great vision, and then the engineering team's gonna be like, we can't build that. And it's like, yes, you can. So it is a good skill. Like just put yourself out there, and the more you do it, the more comfortable you'll get. But if it's easier, start with home. Like if your mom has a business, or your cousin has a business, or even if they don't, like what problems can you solve in their life? Like ask your family, like what's the thing you hate about your job, and go from there. So that way it's somebody you're like comfortable with. But yeah, I would lean into just asking the business though. Like if you feel comfortable enough, just go for it.
So you also brought up something else that also shows up in our curriculum. So with Design Lab, we have something called group critiques, and that's where we get, students in a session, kind of like discussion sessions in college, where it's more of a focus group. You have your opportunity to, learn how to present your work, how to talk about, your work and critique other people's work. Is that a thing at Netflix? Do you guys do design critiques? Is that like a thing that the team does?
Yes, actually, it's funny. So Netflix, I will say, is the first time I've worked on a design team this big. Like, it's a big team. Like, I should have checked before work. So how many people do we have now? It's a lot. Like, we have like over 50 people in my area, my team. It's a lot of people. And in the whole company, there's like over 100 designers. So there's a ton of designers. But we don't have big critiques like that, because that honestly wouldn't be useful. One thing about critique is if the person you're critiquing with doesn't have context. So like if I just show someone a project and they don't understand where I'm coming from, they can really only give me like base level surface advice of like the visuals maybe, but they won't understand like the problem. So the critiques we do are a lot smaller at Netflix. But yeah, our little pods that we kind of call them, our team area of focus, we do critiques together. So it's been really great, honestly, but it's a new experience for me because like I said, in past teams, we haven't really done critiques as much. Like we would kind of do them, but we didn't have like a formal critique practice. I did go to art school for like 1 year, and then I went to like that college where I studied fine art. So I did learn how to do like a proper critique. And I think it's a really helpful skill. Like you're doing it in school, you're gonna use those techniques, you're gonna use them throughout. Like even if you're not presenting your designs, like sometimes for me, I'm presenting my designs not to other designers, but to like PMs, product managers, to data scientists, to like actual like executives in the company or people like users and stuff, like stakeholders that have to get their buy-in. So like I think being able to graciously hear the feedback and also distill out what's important, because sometimes someone might say like, oh, I really don't like that, but you have to get to the why, like why don't they like it? So it's something we do at Netflix, and even though we have like a ritual, like a more formal one, like I have my work buddies, like I will message them, be like, help me please, because one of the things, it's funny, one of the things in my head, and it's probably the closest thing I've done to something like Design Lab, is I didn't get a chance to do a lot of visual design, and I felt like it was my weakness. So I did like some online workshop at my last job to do like a UI for UX designers program. And so I did that, and like we did critiques and stuff on visuals. So that's something I tend to lean into, is like I need help with the visuals. So yeah, I think, yes, like it's funny, like I always tell people the story, when I moved to LA from the Bay Area, I had a very heavy UX portfolio. So it was a lot of like diagrams and user maps and my is a lot of boxes and like shapes. And so a really nice person that I was introduced to, he looked over my portfolio. His name's Everett, and like now he's in charge of his own startup, so shout out to Everett. But anyway, so he looked over my portfolio and he gave me like the best advice. He's like, oh, your portfolio is not very sexy for LA. And I was like, what? And I was like, remember being really offended, because I'm like, how can a portfolio be sexy? But I understood what he meant, because in LA, it's like you have to think of what the industries are here. It's like media, it's like very Hollywood, visual. Bay Area, everyone knows what UX is, but it's not always the same outside in other parts of the country. So I learned I really need to get better at visuals. So I in my head, I think I hyper focused on it, where I was just like, I need visuals. I need better, strong visuals. So yeah, for me, visuals are where I tend to want a lot of critique and feedback from. And so I'm very open to it. I will admit, at Netflix, the feedback culture, if you ever looked up the culture memo, like feedback's one of the things. And I was like, yeah, they just say that. No, they're not kidding. Like feedback at Netflix is very important, and it's open, and like people give you feedback. Like they'll just tell you. And so that did take some getting used to for me, because like my ego inside is like, you don't know what you're saying. So learning how to be the person who's like, no, they're just trying to help. They're not coming in and being like, you spent hours on this and I'm going to tear it down. It's like, hey, have you considered this? So at Netflix, I try to get feedback early and often and just share things for visibility. One of the things I've gotten feedback in past jobs is like, I wish you shared this earlier. I wish you had shared this earlier with us so we could have told you. So I think that's one thing I would encourage all of you, if you're listening, is just be comfortable sharing with people early. Don't get too precious about your designs because they're going to get torn up. Unless you work at like an agency where you just hand it over and then you go. I've never worked at an agency, but yeah, I would say get used to sharing and get used to accepting feedback. And it will make your life easier too, like just all your working relationships when you can take feedback.
Yeah, I think that's like the one like beauty of like knowing a bunch of designers or working with other designers, right, is that they're essentially your safety net. Like they're really, whatever feedback they give you, they're not there to judge you.
Right.
Like they're there to judge like the work, right? Like you're asking for feedback, well, I'm giving you feedback on your work. I'm similar to you. Visuals was something that I will 1000% admit that is just not my strong suit. So when I do get feedback on visuals, like it's painful. Like it's literally like a knife to the heart sometimes, especially when I was first starting out. But now, like the more critiques you get, right, the more feedback you get, you know what to look out for in the future, like when you're working on other projects. So yeah, it's okay, everyone. Take that knife to the heart. It's gonna happen once, but I promise, like it's a big learning.
I just saw someone in the comments say your designs get torn up by agencies too. So good to know. Like that's where I'll say another little funny story. One way when I was trying to improve my portfolio, I Googled designers and I try to find really beautiful portfolios, and they always work at agencies. So I was like, I want to work at an agency. Like they make the best, cool, beautiful work. And then I would meet people at agencies. They're like, I want to get into corporate. Like I want to work at an enterprise company. So it's like the grass is always greener. Like people who are really good at visuals often are like, I need to do UX now. And then people like me who are more heavy on UX are like, I want to make like the next like Nike redesign that like gets awards and stuff. So like, yeah, so good to know that it's not like I thought it was at agencies where you just get to hand it off and go.
Oh man. Okay, we are going to transition to questions because there are a lot of them. So we're not going to get through all of them, but I think with Julia's question, I think we kind of touched on it, but you know, maybe there's something else that we can provide of value. So Julia's question, because this is the top voted one, what tips would you give to someone who is applying for a junior position to stand out and be successful in an interview? And what should you do in the first few months to become a valuable employee? I know you kind of touched on some things, but maybe we can like recap a little bit.
Yeah, so the thing I always say, if you want to stand out, is that personal touch. So showing, and it's not just because it makes you like personal, but to me, it's more like you have initiative, you have drive, like you saw a problem in the real world and you tried to solve it. And I think to me, that's really what makes people stand out, because I think everyone kind of, you learn that format of like defining the problem and doing the research and then you iterate and all that. So that's one thing I would say, like, great, take what you learned and now apply it to some more real world solutions. So do that side projects. And then the next thing I'll say is, what I love to see when people are applying is at the end of your portfolio or like the reflections. Sometimes I even read the first little part and I just skip to the bottom. I'm like, what did they learn? I'll read the whole thing, but I want to see what they learned. And oftentimes they don't have anything. They're just like, and we launched it. It was a success. And I'm like, that never happens. So like, I mean, it does happen, but like, what did you learn? Like, what would you have done if you had more time? Things like that. I think that's like really kind of where I can learn about you and how you think. And then I can see your journey of how you got to this solution, but like, what was something you thought was going to go really well and it went horribly? Like those are the stories I like to hear, because that's been more of my life, my career, like actually my life. Like I said, like I studied so many things and it didn't work out well. So I was like, okay, time to pivot. So if I can see how you pivot, especially in a small startup, that's so helpful, because you're going to be pivoting and your managers are going to be like, oh, now we're going this way. And like the product strategy can be shaky sometimes. So like, yeah, I think showing that you work well with ambiguity, do that. Don't try to deliver a perfectly stitched together story that sounds like you just took care of the problem and it was great and all roses and rainbows. Like, tell me like about how you struggled or you tested with the user and they hated it. Like, I want to hear that story. How did you recover from that? Yeah, so that would be my advice. And then the second part was, what should you become valuable? I think it's similar, like this is what worked for me, but in my first company, Socialcast, it was just more like I could have coasted and just done the bare minimum. And I'm not encouraging like bad work-life balance, so please take that with a grain of salt. But like if I saw a chance for me to use a skill that they didn't hire me for, I would do that. So like I speak Japanese. So like, is there an opportunity for you if you speak another language and you notice like, hey, why aren't we targeting it in this language? Or like adding things like that. Like I say languages because that comes up a lot, but like, have we considered what our site looks like when translated in another language? Things like that. Just doing extra research, things like that. So I would say things that help you as a designer, because it's a skill you can get, but also help the company. So maybe it's working a little late to do a little bit more like user archetype or persona generation. When you're starting off, it might be worth it because you can put that in your portfolio. So that's kind of how I would trade my like work-life balance. Like, yeah, I'm working extra and I'm really pushing to prove myself, but it's not just like, so this job thinks I'm so great, like that's a side benefit, but I'm going to be able to put this in my portfolio and be really proud of it. So that would be my advice, is just look for like the opportunities that might exist to like either connect pieces or connect teams or ideas that they're not aware of.
I love it. I love it. Okay, we are going to skip down to Wilma's question because I think this one's really cool, because I think, you know, some people may be under the impression, and this isn't just for senior designers, but just senior positions in general, that they don't learn anymore. And I definitely don't think that's the case. In the industry of UX, like I think the way to succeed and be a successful designer is to be constantly learning and to constantly like want to grow, right? So Wilma's asking, what are you still learning as a senior product designer? One, as designer, I guess, technique. Two, at, you know, personal. Yep.
Yeah, I'm learning a ton. And it's also at Netflix, I just joined a new team. So I'm on a new team called like Animation Technology Team, Animation Studio Technology. So shout out to them if they're listening. But like the animation area, I did study it for a year, but I'm learning so much. So for me, it's more like, even to this day, like I'm mentoring someone right now, and like she needed help with something like card sorting. And I was like, oh, I kind of forgot about card sorting. Like, should I be doing that? And like, I like Googled it again to read about it. So I'm like, yeah, I learned about card sorting, but like, I haven't used it in a while. So things like that, where you can just kind of like Google techniques and things that maybe you heard about or things you picked up. Netflix has a really good education program. So we've done a lot of like, there's education available that I can do to learn new kind of like ways to solve problems and different things. So yes, I'm always learning. So I just want to say that I do not have it all figured out. And another pro tip too, like with code, a lot of the best engineers I know, they don't know. They Google things all the time. So that made me feel better when I was trying to be a coder, because I was like, wow, they don't know. But anyway, yeah, so I'm still learning a ton. I think just being curious is the number one thing you have to do as a designer, because it's also always growing and evolving. There's new techniques and new technologies coming out. There's new design programs coming out, so things are getting more standardized. But yeah, I've been learning a ton about the animation industry right now, so that's been the biggest thing I've been learning. And so with that, I'm learning a lot of user research techniques and just ways to like work with our like consumer insights team and do user interviews and shadowing and things like that. I think at Netflix though, the number one thing I've learned is how to present my ideals and kind of be independent. We have a big design team, but I'm like leading the design stuff for my area. So I have to write, you know, specs or product requirement kind of briefs and things like that. That's something I haven't done in the past, and just documenting really well, making decks and like pitching things, kind of selling my vision. That's a skill that I'm learning. And I feel like I'm getting better at it. I kind of enjoy it now, where I'm like, oh, I'm going to pitch this. Like when I first started, I was terrified. I'd be like, you want me to do what to all these people who've been here already? They're geniuses. Like, I can't pitch anything to them. Like, can I have more time? It's like, no, go. My first manager at Netflix, she was so great, Kat. She like really encouraged me to just own that. So yeah, that's something I've been learning. And it's a personal thing too, like trusting myself more. That's a new thing I've been really trying to work on. And that imposter syndrome is so sneaky and annoying. But I'm realizing that, you know, it goes back to how I used to try to hide my path. You know, like I don't have the degree, I don't have the prestige. It's like, no, like my experience is my prestige, and like that's how I've gotten here. So how can I think sometimes as women, often like culturally as like women of color, like sometimes we don't like to talk, like hype ourselves up and be like that hype person. You got to do it, okay? Just do it. You're amazing. Like people, you know, there's more artists out there like Lizzo and Megan Thee Stallion who just have that confidence. Bring that to your design life. And so I'm trying to do that with myself. It's like this talk today, you know, a year ago, I would not have wanted to do this talk. I'd be like, no, I don't want to talk about myself for an hour. But now I'm like, if I can inspire one person out there who's like, I'm not going to get a job as a designer, like, no, you can, you will, there's a path, like, I believe in you. So that's the skill I'm working on, is how can I kind of give back to, I feel like, the community that people have helped me get here. So I want to help the next people get here. So when I'm old and gray, I can look back and see so many young, diverse, happy designers. And I shouldn't even say young. Like if you're older and you're transitioning, do it. Because like we need all ages, all type of people in tech. People think I'm young because my face looks young, but I'm actually a lot older than I look. So I just use TikTok a lot. So that's probably why sometimes I speak like I'm way younger. But anyway, yeah. So please don't be ashamed of your path or where you came from. Find a way to make it your superpower, and then like lean into it with the tools that your school like Design Lab's giving you. Like lean into that, like learn from it. Like you're gonna be fine. So yeah, that's what I've been learning. So I'm sharing that with all of you now.
That's something that Tiffany and I were chatting about before we jumped on live, that, you know, we feel very grateful to have made the transition. And that's really what either of us really want for everybody. Like, we feel very grateful and we want others to kind of feel the same thing. And I definitely feel like I've met so many designers who have transitioned kind of feel the same way, you know, like we just feel so grateful that our voices now, you know, kind of somewhat matter. And if, you know, hopefully more than somewhat, but we want everyone's voice to matter. And that's why we do what we do. Yeah.
And I'll say one other thing too is, like, when I first started in design, it wasn't very diverse. And so if you think about it, it's like a certain type of person is making all the apps and tools we all use, and they don't know, like they can't bring those experiences to the table. So the more diverse design can be, the more perspectives we have, like the better the tools. I build a lot of tools because I build things for work. People used to work, like the better the tools will be, but like the better the apps will be, the next Instagram, the next Twitter, the next TikTok, the next Clubhouse. Like, the more diversity and different types of people we have designing those experiences, like what a better world we'll all be in. So yes, please, all of you, like keep at it.
All right, I think that actually segues really nicely into Dominic's question. As a person of color, how has it been navigating the design industry, and what insights and or perspectives do you feel you have brought to Netflix as a person of color?
Well, that's a really good, that's one of my other big passions, because like I did not know a lot of other people of color in tech starting out, especially like Black people in tech. There were not that many when I was in the Bay Area. Like, of course there's a few, but the companies I worked for, like I was often the only Black person, sometimes the only person of color, you know, in the room. So I think that for me, what really helped was finding, once I, you know, I'm not gonna say once I realized that, it's pretty clear when you walk in, you can tell. But once I started feeling the repercussions of that, I went online. Like I said, I used Twitter, and I just would try. I used to have a Facebook. I don't anymore. But at the time, there was a group called like Women of Color in the Bay Area, and I joined that group. And I would just see so many like inspirational women of different, like, you know, representative background groups. And I'm like, wow, like there's another Black woman who's like a senior designer at XYZ company. And like I can even think of some people like I still follow on Twitter today that were really helpful for me as just inspirations. Like some of them I never even talked to, but I would just be like, I have a folder on my desktop with all the portfolios that inspired me, and I would just go there and be like, I'm gonna be her someday. So like, I know that sounds kind of silly and weird, but like that's how it helped me. And eventually I started reaching out to people, and I would just be like, oh, I'll just follow you. One bit of advice I give for networking in that way, like I wouldn't encourage you to just follow people just because you want their job. Like, I mean, you can follow them, but like don't reach out to them and be like, hi, teach me how to be a designer. They probably get hundreds of messages like that. So what I would do is follow people who seem cool, like people I wanted to be friends with. Like I really like K-pop, so I would follow designers that like K-pop music, or if they like animation and they like things I like then I would follow them and try to be their friend. Or they live nearby and they go to a coffee shop, so I can tell they post. I'm like, okay, like we both have an interest in coffee. Maybe we could be friends. So that's what I would do starting out early when I was trying to meet more diverse designers. And at Netflix, it's really diverse from my experience. I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's the most diverse design team I've ever worked on, and I feel really supported. A lot of our leadership is either like a person of color or like a woman, underrepresented groups. So I really enjoy that. It feels great, and it's like it's a breath of fresh air. Like we even have a group, like it's the most like Black women designers I've ever worked with, for example. And like there's a lot of like there's 8 of us, so like that doesn't sound like a lot, but I mean it is a lot. Like if you look at other tech companies, you know, where there might be 0 or 1. So you know it's not enough, but it's getting better. So that's another passion for me. So one way I can give back is like mentoring things like HBCU. Netflix is doing like an internship with Norfolk State, so I got to participate in that and be a mentor. Things like that give me like a lot of motivation. So
that is amazing and also very inspiring. Okay, so this is the next juicy question everyone wants to know. Can you describe a typical day within your role at Netflix?
Yeah, it's funny. There's no typical day, but I would say lately my typical days, we're doing a lot of research, learning. The Netflix animation studio is really new. So as my team's job is kind of how can we use technology to support the studio. So we're just doing a lot of research. We recently launched the beta for the project I'm working on. So I can't go into too many details, but like the beta release is a big deal. Like finally, it was really exciting to like release this project into the wild. But so my typical day now is just kind of like thinking about what's next after the beta and like how we can validate the hypothesis. So I'm doing a lot of planning. I'm working with my PM partner. We're doing a lot of research and just interviewing different types of users to see how we can better support them. So Netflix has a heavy meeting culture. It's kind of like a joke. So I have a lot of meetings. I try to keep all those in the morning, so I have afternoons free to actually work. But it depends on what stage of the project we're at. Sometimes there's a lot of context switching where you have like, you don't have a lot of time to just have heads down design time. You're like in this one meeting, and then there's like a cultural meeting, like maybe like a group you're in at Netflix has a meeting and you want to do that, and then you have like a workshop. Because I work for the animation studio, I get to do a lot of their like cool little interactive, like they have like interviews with directors and stuff. So I'm like, oh, I want to listen to that. So it's a lot of meetings and stuff, and a lot of reviewing my notes. So I'm a really heavy note taker. My iPad's not in here, but I use like my iPad to take notes because you can search my horrible handwriting with the iPad. So I highly recommend having a good note-taking and documentation system. But yeah, Netflix, it just depends on what stage we're at. So like for me, it's either going to be a heavy morning of meetings or user testing, or it'll be like an afternoon of synthesis or design, or just sharing out things. And then I would say every few weeks there's some kind of big presentation that you have to do, depending on the phase. So it's a mix, but I actually like it. I feel like each pod at Netflix is like a little startup, and we're all in this bigger Netflix machine. So I really like that. I would say in the past it was a little more predictable at startups because the speed was fast. I'm not saying it was slower, but Netflix is just, things go really fast in media, so you just kind of have to keep up. But working on work-life balance, that's one of my goals this year. So I'll be going on vacation soon. Can't wait. So yeah, right now I'm just working really hard so I get ready for my vacation.
Yes, we all love taking time off. We definitely should. Okay, I think this one's actually really interesting because, and I think this probably comes from kind of our experience coming from places like the Bay Area and LA, where there is actually a tech culture. We know that with a lot of tech companies, often your way in is usually through a contract position rather than a full-time role. What are your thoughts on that? And do you, I guess, encourage going down that path, like going contract first? Or, is it, I know it's a safe route, right, to want the full-time employee role, but what are your thoughts on that?
So I've actually never done contract full-time. I've done contract while working full-time because I'm like, I need more money. But I've always had like a full-time job, so I can't really speak to my experience. But I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier. If your contract, still make sure you know what you're taking away from each contract. I think it's a great way to get a lot of diverse experience and a way to see, like, for example, like for me, I noticed my career started going in an enterprise direction, meaning I was doing a lot of tools for work, and I was building a lot of dashboards, designing dashboards and stuff. But a contract role could have been a way for me to try something else. Like maybe I was like, ooh, do I want to get into mobile design? Now I don't really do mobile design anymore, but in the past I have done mobile tools and stuff. So like I would encourage contract work. One thing about me is I'm not really great at like managing like the insurance and things like that, and like the taxes as a contractor. So for me, that's why I've shied away from doing contract work. But if you need a job and you just need to get out there, just keep in mind it doesn't have to be forever. Maybe you'll do contract work for 3 or 4 years, and then you'll land that more like full-time gig, and from there it will only be full-time. So yeah, it just depends. On the flip side, I do have one friend who's been doing contract work. He's been a designer longer than me. He only does contract work, and it's because he works for like 3 or 4 months, and then he goes to like other countries for like 2 months, and he comes back and does contract work. So like, this is pre-COVID, of course. So contract lifestyle could be really flexible, especially with remote work. So, lean into it if it makes you feel comfortable. But I would say contract or not, like more think about your journey and your story of where you're going with each position you take, and be really intentional. Not intentional in taking a job. Sometimes you have to take a job. Be intentional about figuring out what the story is of like what you're going to learn at that job.
Completely. Okay, we're going to do 2 more questions. And I think one's a common question that we get with our students, because they are working on hypothetical projects, right, as they work through the program. But I think in general, this is something that's great for them to know. Jeff is asking, how do you track and measure the impact of your work as it relates to the role you had on any given project?
Yeah, that one's hard because like things like metrics, for example, like sometimes I've done it retroactively where I had to look back. So we weren't tracking that in the project, where I'm like, that never came up in the planning. And like I was early in my career, so I just didn't think to like think of the impact. So sometimes I had to like look back and be like retroactively like, what was the impact? Like, what did we learn? I'm trying to remember. So that's one tip I will say, like, take really good notes, save all your materials as you work, like, save it all. Because when you're building your portfolio, you might have forgotten something. But yeah, for me now, what I try to do is have that impact goal early on before we start working, even if it's something small, like a visual redesign. Like, well, okay, why are we doing this redesign? Like, one of my jobs we added, it was like the most basic project if you think about it, but the site, it was an e-commerce, and we didn't have really, like, when you logged into the site, you were logged in and that was it. So you could log in and you could log out, and that was it. There was nothing else. So we had to add some actual like functionality for logging in. So it was actually pretty simple. But it's like, what is the impact of that? Well, the impact is really simple. It's a common expected pattern, and like users expect to be able to see their order history and things like that. So yeah, I didn't have like numbers and metrics and saying like, oh, we converted more people and blah, blah, blah. I didn't have any of that. But the reason we did it, besides like the product person saying this is what we're doing next, was just because it's a better experience for the user, and like it's commonly that's how kind of I retroactively added an impact to that portfolio piece, was just me saying like, look, like most sites, all of our competitors had an account management experience and we didn't. So the impact is now we've caught up to that, like we're at parity with our competitors. Now we can hopefully go in the next steps and do X, Y, Z, blah, 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 blah. Because I feel like in that portfolio piece, the work was really important, but the impact part was a little weak. So I was kind of like, all right, let me show you my forward thinking nature and show you what kind of impact I hope we will make based off of this work. So yeah, the impact stuff, if you can get it in early, please do. It'll make your life a lot easier. Think about that early. And if you have a partner, like your PM, or you don't have a PM, your engineering partner, and they're not thinking about it, like push for that. Just like take that time and like stand up and be like, hey, like, can we think about like what's the goal? Like, how will we know we succeeded at the end of this project? That's one really good way to start thinking about like the impact, so that way you can answer the question. And if you don't succeed, great, it's a story for your portfolio. Like, we didn't succeed, so what can you say about it then, and what will you do to succeed next? What do you want to explore next? So yeah, I would say my big thing with impact is like, good or bad, just try to talk to it in some aspect.
Totally. Okay. This is the money question that we're going to wrap up with. So this is from Ron. Where do you see UX heading into like the next 5 to 10 years? Like, how do you see the landscape of UX?
It's really interesting, I think, because more tech has creeped into so many parts of our lives. Like my doctor's office is super smart, for example, and there's all this tech happening and things like that. So I think the impact of UX is going to be less attraction for designers to go to like the really trendy company that's doing some cool app, and maybe more like meaningful design, and like, how can I help my local government have a better UX? How can I help like the health, like with COVID, like the healthcare system like fell apart in so many ways, and there were so many technology like letdowns and things, and like how can we use tech to improve access to things like that? And also a little bit like, I'm very passionate about like social justice and things like that. So like, how can tech be used in a good way, but also the flip side, like how is tech bad when you have all one kind of person building AIs and things like that? So I think to me, that's where the future of tech is going, and also blurring the line more and more, because I know in the past at companies, like I am a UX designer, I just do UX and I pass it to the visual designer and they do visual, and then it goes down this like waterfall. And I think it's not going to be like that anymore. Like designers should be getting in earlier and earlier, and like things like machine learning, like we need to have designers in early in that, bringing that human side to it much earlier. So to me, I think tech is not going to be something where it's like, oh, I'm in tech and I'm a certain kind of person. It's more like tech is everywhere, and I have so many interests, so I can use my tech background in so many different fields. And it's going to be earlier and earlier. Like kids are using tech younger and younger. So like, you know, yeah, I think tech is just going to be inescapable at the point. And like, hopefully it'll be to the point where now when your parents hear you're a tech worker, for example, for me, like my parents know exactly what I'm talking about. And it's not like a generational thing. Like no matter how old or young you are, you understand what tech is.
Yep. 100%. Okay, we're going to wrap up, but any parting words of advice for our aspiring designers?
I will say, as a designer, find your tribe, whether it's in your company or online or offline when it's safe to see people again. Like, have that support system, whether it's, because I have friends from my very early first job at Socialcast, who I might not talk to every day, but I know if I text them, I can still be like, hi, how are you? Like, what's up? I have friends at every job I go. I try to always, like I said it a few times, what you take away from each job, one of those things is your people that you meet, and then having that group online or just some way to like have people support you, because sometimes tech can feel like a rat race where you're competing with other people and like, I'm not at this company yet. Like, don't do that. Just have your goals, find what makes you happy, and like find what gives your job meaning. I think that's key. So like use your friends, your tribe to do that. That's my advice.
I love that. I love that. All right. Thank you so much. This was incredible. I think like there's so many, you've inspired so many people here. Like it's all over the chat, like truly. This is the first time also that Livestorm's like, do you want to enable emoji reactions? I was like, yeah, sure. And the emojis have been flying. It's insane. But yeah, no, I'm so happy. I feel like this was like a long catch up between us and that everyone just got to listen to us, which was awesome. I also feel like we kind of live parallel lives and, you know, in our journeys and just kind of like what we value and work and stuff. So thank you so much for joining us today and just like sharing, you know, your journey with us. I think is very important for everyone to hear, especially, you know, with being women, being people, you know, people of color. Like, I think like, you know, like you said, perspectives, the more perspectives, the better. It always just comes down to the more, the better. It really shouldn't just be down to one individual, right? Like it should be everybody.
Yeah, I agree. And like, I know I saw someone post about BTS in there. Yes, I'm a huge BTS fan. So like find me on Twitter and we can talk about our biases and stuff. But no, seriously, like I want to be there if people need help or an idea to bounce off or like a shout out. Like, yeah, I'm happy to connect on Twitter. So yeah, anyone who has more questions, follow me, I guess, find me, send me a message.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. This is the end. As usual, this will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. Just go and find us. We're Design Lab Learning on YouTube. So it'll be up there if you want to share this with other people to inspire them as well, just because, I don't know, Tiffany, your voice is just so inspiring. It's also very just like nice to hear you speak. Because I would say that the majority of students here only hear me speak. So it's very nice to not have to do all the talking. But yeah, no, this is incredible. If anything, I may try to steal you to be maybe one of our mentors at some point one day.
Oh my God, I would love that.
That would be awesome. Who would not love Tiffany as a mentor? Like, come on. Yeah, see, we already got some yeses. This is incredible. But yeah, no, thank you so much. Like, I truly, truly enjoyed this. And yeah, hopefully we can do this again. Maybe we'll go on IG Live next time, guys, and maybe we'll do it more like a live Q&A session. That'll be fun. Yeah. All right, we're gonna end this. And then for anyone who is looking into UX, you know, Design Lab, we aren't just UX Academy. It's, you know, if you want to learn the basics, if you want to kind of get a feel for UX, we have a UX Academy Foundations course that's starting on May 10th. That's when the next cohort launches. So if you're interested, you know, get your feet wet a little bit, join us. It'll be fun. You'll see me. Maybe you'll see Tiffany at some point. But yeah, cool. We are going to end this here. Thank you again, Tiffany. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you later. Bye.
Bye.